Yeah, so thanks again for coming to the discussion. I think the title really has an emphasis on all ages, and the reason for that is because what essentially I wanted to talk about today and the areas that I wanted to cover is a discussion about the complexity of managing large account systems in gaming and managing large audiences in gaming. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity in that, from a technical level, from a product level, but there's also a large factor that plays a hand in those discussions, which is privacy, so regulation and compliance, and that's where a lot of developers, are reading the regulatory landscape and are looking at the challenges that they face and the opportunities that it creates, and not having great visibility on what the solutions are that they can use and how we can collaborate as a gaming landscape to effectively improve the user experience through a lot of those challenges. So, yeah, I'm going to cover a lot of those topics today. I think hopefully I'm in a good position to do that. Apologies, the headshot is really old. I am going to get it updated at some point. But I'm the General Manager of Kids Web Services here at Epic Games. Kids Web Services is a large suite of tools that are used to manage youth audiences online, to manage mixed audience games. We're not specifically talking about kids products anymore and kids apps and kids games. We're talking about all apps and games, or a vast majority. Everyone has to deal with these issues. Youth audiences find their way almost anywhere nowadays, particularly as the regulations change in their scope and broaden. All of our technology is used within our own account system, so it gates our own products and services. So lots of users play all of our games, and like Fortnite and Fall Guys. But we're also very much a third-party service, so we're used in lots of other titles, lots of other games, very high profile. So Pokemon Go, Among Us, used in account systems for Lego, for Bandai Namco, for Take-Two. Lots of partners use our services, and we're working with them to meet the challenges that the legislation provides for game companies. I think, generally speaking, the Kids Web Services tools are just a large suite of tools that help developers to manage youth audiences at scale. So there's a specific reason why we call out the youth audience part of the audience in general, and I'll talk about that again. Today, I just wanted to walk around 3 areas, just to give an overview of the landscape as we see it at the moment, to talk about why we think that it's important that developers think about these areas. So I really do think it is a period of time where it is important for developers to consider the legislation around them. And then I think just some things that we've learned from managing some of these processes and managing this verification and consent management and age gates and all the stuff that we've been doing in this area. So hopefully it's interesting to walk around those things today. I have to put this slide up here. This is not legal advice. We're straying into an area of compliance and privacy legislation, but this is our objective point of view. We see a lot of dialogue. We work with a lot of businesses on these challenges. We don't create complete 360-degree solutions that solve all of their issues, but no one can. But we do hear a lot, and we do see a lot, and we do a lot of work in this space and have done for 7 or 8 years. So firstly, to talk about the landscape, I think where does this actually impact a developer? So if you're making an awesome game or service or website or whatever it is, you really want to focus on making an amazing experience, making a great product, exciting users in your game, driving engagement, driving retention, doing all that stuff that developers want to do. Where the legislation meets your game is really in what features and functionality that game uses or offers to players. So, more and more we're talking about, chat functionality, social community sharing, leaderboards, and account systems. I think, or geolocation is obvious for services like Pokemon Go, but I think account system is really the key here. Account systems are becoming the heart of most ecosystems for the large gaming companies and small. Persistent identity, crossing over your collected items and inventory and all that kind of stuff is super important in account systems, and that's where developers face a challenge. So obviously, when you're enabling these features and when you're creating accounts, you're collecting data from your audience in general. That's totally fine. You can get their consent. We're all used to the regulatory landscape around us as adults. But when you have a youth audience that comes into your experience and they find their way in, this information is personal information in a lot of cases, and that's where the legislation comes in. I won't go over the legislation in too much detail because I'm sure many people are aware of some of it, but this regulatory landscape really started with COPPA in the US. It was effectively the first regulation that said, hey, there's an age of digital consent where there's a lot of protection required for users and for people who are under that age. when they're using your games and using your experiences. And it created some basic rule sets. I think it's pretty much the reason why the internet was built over 13, obviously, because it relies on the age of digital consent, relies on you know, creating protections and doing a lot of extra work for users who are under that age. The landscape now is much, much, much more complicated. So a developer now is looking at more markets, more audiences, and way broader scope for this legislation. You know, you've got stuff here like the age-appropriate design code, which has come out of the UK, but also been adopted in California to a certain level. It way broadens the scope of what COPPA set out in the first place. GDPR does the same. And there are lots of different regulations in different markets, all at different stages of progressing. And there's a lot of traffic in one direction, which is for a developer to try and deal with a lot of signals that are coming out of the landscape in terms of regulation and compliance. So generally, this legislation is now kind of here. You know, when you're in an experience and you're creating a game or an account system and you have users of mixed ages or your general audience, then you have a requirement in the kind of the center of the legislation to provide verifiable parental consent, which is essentially just two things. You need to get consent from the parent, and you need to verify that they're an adult in that process, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But more generally, the market now for game developers is there's a lot of talk about age assurance and appropriate design. So it's much more general now. You know, you need to think about when audiences are coming in, are you creating a service which is appropriate for their age? Are you sure of their age? If you receive any signals, you know, to the contrary of what they've told you in self-declaration or anything like that. So there's a lot of complexity now. And really, I think as I said, the two central challenges here are consent management and verification. They're like a thread which ties a lot of the regulation together, which is a very basic, you know, starting point, which is if a child or anyone who's a youth audience and that age demographic is widening, can't give you consent themselves, then give you permission themselves, then someone needs to give consent. And then the second piece is, you know, you can't allow a youth audience member to just sidestep through a very easy gate to provide themselves their own consent. So you need to provide some verification. And that's where we've been trying to meet these challenges for the last 6 or 7 or 8 years, actually. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So consent management is relatively straightforward, and we've all experienced it a million times. So it's the very basic process of, you know, this is a mocked up game company, but it's a very simple process. You know, hey, you know, your parent needs to help us with consent for this experience, for you to play this game, or for you to create an account or open up chat functionality. You know, please provide their email. When we get to the parent, there's the very standard boxes that we've all seen a million times, which is, can you review the permissions? Can you tick the boxes to say that you're okay with that? We do it generally on a lot of websites for our own permissions, but you're obviously, in this case, the messaging is that the parent is doing it for their child. This is the gnarly part. So the next step, which is verification, is, hey, that's great. We're, you know, delighted that you're allowing your child to play Among Us. But now we need you to verify your adult status. And I've actually reduced this by 3 screens because there is an unavoidable requirement to push the user or the user's parent, in this case, through a lot of friction. It's there because you need friction. Otherwise, if there's no friction, then you don't create a barrier for people to get through this. There are a lot of learnings that we have, but this is where the trouble is. So really, this is what it looks like. You know, consent management is something that we're all used to, and it can be navigated pretty freely. Verification can create a lot of friction for users. It can create a lot of disruption in an account system when you have to pass that hurdle. There are reasons why I think this should be considered important for developers. So all of that stuff has firmly been focused on by a lot of companies up to now. You know, anyone who deals with youth audiences generally creates products that are, you know, aimed at children or anyone who's under the age of digital consent. But now I think much more broadly, game developers and platforms have to think about these challenges. And I think it's important for one first reason, which is obvious, is the law. So there is a stick, you know, the stick and the carrot. You know, the stick in this situation is inaction carries risk. You know, if you have a huge account system, if you have a huge game which could be perceived to have youth audiences in it, and you don't take some steps to manage that situation, then you obviously are, you know, in danger of a regulator in some market taking exception to that. I think that the The risk, how much risk is obviously a question for every developer to answer. I think it's probably dependent mostly on the countries you operate in, the scale of your audiences, and what features you're enabling and what data is being collected in there. But all of the big guys are in the targets for regulators to fix this situation. I think the deeper reason for a developer to think about this is very important, though, is that this situation isn't going to change. Regulation only goes in one direction. It might stutter. It might take a long time in some cases, but it only goes one way. And especially in this area, protection of youth audiences is not going to be a thing that they start to roll back. There isn't going to be less protection. There aren't going to be less markets. It's going to be more markets, more audiences, and the scope is going to continue to broaden. If you're a large developer, if you have a portfolio of games, this is firmly in your scope to make sure that you're protected against this risk. There's also a point here that it's also much easier to deal with this stuff early rather than late. If you've not got a giant ecosystem or account system just yet, but you're thinking about building it, or you're in the process of rolling out features and functionality or account systems, dealing with this stuff early, there's a huge bias to help to do that, to help the situation from the start. And the reason is, you're increasing your problem downstream if you don't. So if you create an account system and you don't go through a lot of this stuff, you don't segregate audiences clearly, you don't create some kind of verification to gate stuff like parental controls or anything else that's there for adults in your ecosystem, then you just are creating an issue that is going to get bigger and bigger, and downstream you're going to have to do a lot of retroactive work to fix the situation post, whereas dealing with it up front could have been less work and could have provided you with an outcome which is better. And I think we kind of, if you saw the regulations that were listed up on the screen, I think when we look back on the next couple of years, I think we'll look back and say we were kind of in the eye of the storm where a lot of regulation went into action and kicked in. All of those different legislations that were shown on screen, there's many more. The state legislation in the US is a very, constant topic at the moment. There's lots of different regulations and different discussions going on about how that rolls out. So I think we might be in the eye of the storm now, and a lot of businesses are feeling that, and they're thinking about how to protect their account systems for the future. But I would say it's not just the giant account systems and the big ecosystems that need to worry about that. Specific games have these issues too. So, if you make an awesome game, we're in a market now where our own store and lots of other stores are trying to really focus on, there's tons of indie games, there's lots of communities, there's lots of, growth in the landscape and amazing products out there. And this problem can be faced by those too. I think this is the way I like to think about small developers. We tend to speak to a lot of small developers when they have issues in this area, and they've got a pyramid of requirements in their business, and somewhere down the bottom here there's kind of, oh yeah, we need to create an age gate at some point, and we need to fix parental consent maybe. But at the top you've got how do we get more players in? How do we scale? Like, this thing is growing, and we need to manage our community. There's loads of bugs. What happens generally is that they get a tap on the shoulder, or they get a complaint or a report in their ecosystem or in their game, and then the whole pyramid goes completely the other way up, and they're like, oh no, some regulator has sent us a letter, or the FBI has sent us a letter and asked us about this case of a youth audience in our game, and now the whole thing is scrapped. We've got to deal with this immediately, and it becomes an emergency situation. So there's a lot of requirement, not only for the giant ecosystems, but for everyone, I think. But there is a carrot. This is the extent of my clip art skills. Apologies, but this is because there is opportunity in this as well. So it isn't just about risk. It isn't just about making sure you're protected against regulators coming after you. I think there's a lot of opportunity in youth audiences that isn't discussed enough. The first one is that there's lots of them. So youth audiences are the fastest growing cohort on the internet. They are extremely active. And really, this is about enabling more players to play your games. If you take a step which is very common historically in this space, although the regulation is making it harder and harder, then you block these users. So you make your service restricted to exclude youth audiences because it's too hard, or you restrict the features that they're able to use because it's not something you want to tackle. You're really creating, you're missing out on an opportunity to have a lot more players in your ecosystem. We've got partners who launch a mobile game, and there are 1.5 million extra accounts in their account system because they've just gone through some of these steps, or we've worked with them to figure out a path to managing VPC. And they also represent a lot more than that. So I think not just scale. I think in terms of engagement and creation, youth audiences are really kind of unmatched and not spoken about enough. They are scaling huge platforms at the moment in the world. Their energy, their creativity is often overlooked as a huge building block that a lot of ecosystems use, and a lot of time is spent by them doing a lot of stuff on the internet. I think the main thing is they're big influences of culture, especially because we're talking about the regulation widening to under 18s. We're talking about, thinking about youth audiences a lot more broadly than just under 13s now. There are very clearly influences of a lot of stuff that goes on. And there's also the revenue piece. I think if you think about the short-term revenue you derive from youth audiences in your game, absolutely. And every game is different, every experience is different, so you make your own judgment. But in terms of lifetime, there's a much different conversation. If you're talking about a 15-year-old in Germany playing your game or becoming a part of your account system or your ecosystem, you've got to think about that, because denying access for those users is something that could be very costly over the lifetime that they use your products and they are in your ecosystem. So if we go back to the main challenge here, so if we assume that we know that account systems have to deal with this stuff, and we talked earlier about really the challenge here is verification. So if we can fix this, if we can fix verification and make it easier, take away a lot of the friction that the user experiences, then we've really got a good way to enable developers to tackle this stuff easier and not fear for the consequences on their audience and worry about the implementation requirements of it. That brings me to the three things, I guess, really that we've learned from rolling out these services and trying to deal with this situation globally up to this point in gaming. The first one is that games are really global, and that means that this verification challenge is really global by consequence too. So you're dealing with, we need to communicate really effectively. We translate all of our services into 19 languages, but we also need to provide choice. So having an adequate measure of parent verification, providing adult status verification globally, is really about aggregating different methods for the parent to verify their adult status. No person, not just parents, wants to be backed into a corner when they only have one button to click and they need to give their payment card information over to pass. That creates too high a barrier. We try to front load our UI so that every parent, no matter which country they're in, has multiple options, how they would see the most privacy-preserving and best and easiest way for them to verify their adult status, and they make that choice. So we put it in their hands. And we're constantly increasing the number of verification vendors and methods that are in our system, because that's a requirement. Any developer looking at the space, you build this stuff yourself or you use services like ours, you have got to create a scenario where there are lots of options for a parent to choose from to verify. Otherwise, globally, it just won't work. Some markets, even if you choose one method, there are some markets where payment card verification has a miserable distribution, so you lose tons and tons of players there. To create an inclusive, approachable method for parents to verify is something that we're working on a great deal. I think the second thing we've learned is that this process of verification, although I've talked about the friction, is not as disruptive as large ecosystems and platforms and developers and game companies think it is. So the reason for that is, really, you're only talking about certain markets in most cases. So you can choose to make general rules in your product and have the service roll out very, equally across all of your users globally. But you can also choose to make it something that you roll out where the legislation requires. So you can make it our services can do this for you, but you can do it yourself. You can figure out where the places are that you need to apply different rules. It obviously is only certain users. It sounds strange to say that, but when we deal with companies and gaming ecosystems, they tend to think about their onboarding flow and focus on it for all users. And we're like, no, this is only something where if someone declares their age as a minor, or if you detect they're a minor in some other way, this is the protection you put around that group of users. So it isn't for everyone. And we also work on what we describe as progressive permissioning. So we never recommend to partners that they front load this at the doors of their experience and don't let anyone in. It's very, very, very rare that the user is going to be blocked by this. In our own account system, a player can come in and create a cabined mode, and they can still play our experiences while they're waiting for their parent to go through these flows on their side. So it is something that we try to talk about as less disruptive than people imagine. The other thing I think is important when we think about this is verification is just something that needs to be done now more in ecosystems in general. So one thing that we talk about a lot is, if you're taking a parent account and you're providing a verification for this VPC process, you're also just getting a verification of adult status to that account. In a lot of ecosystems, there is a notion of a parent or a twin child account anyway. Loads of stuff is great in terms of having that adult verification. It gives you a lot more freedom, gating features and functionality, gating content in a lot of platforms. You want to make sure that, you segregate the audiences. An age appeals process, which is a very general use case. You can use, all of adult verification and parent verification are used very commonly for a lot of reasons. And it creates that stamp on the user account on your end. So you're, again, going back to the point I made earlier, you're minimizing downstream problems if you have more users you've got a verified stamp of age. So they've passed some level of verification, provides you a better platform to deal with stuff later. The main point that we've learned, though, and the thing that we try to talk about most is that we can only fix a lot of the friction for the player and their parents in this ecosystem if we collaborate as an industry together. So a big focus of our tools is to work with partners to minimize friction for our mutual players. I wanted to use our partnership with Innersloth and their game Among Us to demonstrate this because it's easier. But essentially, as we described earlier, when a user comes in and they want to play our games, they create an Epic account. If a player under the age of digital consent comes in to create an Epic account, they're required to have their parent or guardian go through VPC. The verification piece is in there. Among Us also do this. So when you go into Among Us and you can use you can play Among Us, but when you want to use free chat functionality or you want to create an account for yourself, the same system applies. So you are required to get VPC from the parent. The amazing thing that we try to do, the way that we reduce friction, is that there's no need for the same parent to do this twice if their kid plays both games. And that's central to the way that collaboration is going to fix this situation. So what we do with our systems at the back end is we ensure that if the parent of the child, has already verified their adult status to create an Epic account, we don't make them do the same thing again when their child plays Among Us and they're required to go through that same process. And it works either way. So whichever time the parent has verified their adult status first, we carry that verification over anonymously. We do that with a piece of technology called the Parent Graph. There's no need to look at this in too much detail, but we can send on details to anyone who's interested. But essentially, we take a one-way encrypted hash of the parent's email when we're about to verify them as an adult. We check our Parent Graph database. If they're not in there, if that one-way encrypted hash isn't stored, then we pass the parent through the required verification in their market or to the standard that the developer requires. But when they're verified, we add them to the Parent Graph database, which allows us to call on that anonymous encrypted hash code. It's a really simple piece of technology, but it's incredibly impactful. And we run it very transparently. And this is central to how we feel like collaboration between game developers will reduce friction, because if we don't do something like this, then the alternatives are dire. And it really, really reduces friction. So all of those screens that I showed you earlier for verification, and I took 3 of them away, they're all gone. There's just one screen which says, hey, can you verify? And then, thank you very much. That's it. So there is no, we've shredded the amount of data collected from the parents in this ecosystem, and we've really created one of those best-in-class experiences where you don't even know that friction existed because we've taken it away before you even see it. And that's really where we're hoping to get to by collaborating with more partners alongside the ones that I've listed earlier. The consequences of not taking action, as I said, I do feel are very dire. So what we are aiming down the barrel of, if we don't collaborate in this way, whether it's via our services or others, is that we all, as every experience and game out there, verify exactly the same parents over and over and over and over and over. That's going to be a terrible experience for them, and it's also going to have a huge impact on our onboarding flows into our account systems longer term. Again, if you assume that and you consider that the regulation continues to roll on and will continue to capture more audiences and more players, then this becomes a very important challenge that we need to face. Because we can really just, as I said, we can really smooth this process out. We can really reduce the amount of friction that a parent sees. The last points I'll make are we have already verified just approaching 19 million parents, and they're in the Parent Graph already. So we've been working on this for a while. We've been reducing friction for a lot of people up to this point over the last 7 or 8 years. Every partner who we work with on this, we can say to them, hey, if you need to do this, if your account system needs to roll out these protections, 20 to 40% of those users, we're going to already have verified their parents. It's going to be a really reduced friction experience that they get, and so we can have a large impact. And that's the focus for us. The focus is really about making impact. We see this as a way that developers can collaborate together and improve the experience for their players. You know, we're minimizing the amount of data we're collecting, we're shredding, we're really helping the privacy landscape, we feel. The benefit is really felt by everyone. So, you know, developers get a better conversion rate into their experience and they reduce their risk of the situation in terms of legislation. You know, players get a better experience because they seamlessly go into games, they have more, you know, experiences that are open to them. And their parents get less friction, they don't have to go through all this hassle. We all would like a bit less, you know, requirement to go through lots of screens and verifying things, so we can really change the landscape with this. And the last point is, you know, the end result of this is that we have larger ecosystems. It's very important to us, it's very important to a lot of our partners that, you know, we maximize the amount of people that can use our experiences. Any developer or platform can use all of these tools for free and utilize the parent graph as it is now. You know, reach out to me and we can speak to you about the tools that we provide and how we help experiences. And that's it. Thanks very much.